Hello, my friends, and welcome back to Living Inspired with Autism. This is the podcast for parents who are raising autistic children and who want to feel more supported, more emotionally steady, and more in charge of their own lives. And I am your host, Antoinette, and I'm a life coach for parents of autism, and I'm also mom to my own autistic son, Max. Now, I've been thinking about something lately that has really shifted the way, it's been coming for a while, but it's really shifted the way I want to speak to you on this podcast. So much of the conversation around parenting autism starts with the struggle, the exhaustion, the appointments, school, meltdowns, behaviors, fear about the future, the strain on relationships, lack of time, and all the stuff that you have to be thinking about, the mental load. And all of it is real. I am not going to pretend it isn't, but I also don't want the only way that I connect with you be through your pain. I don't want to keep reminding you how hard your life is in order to convince you that you need support. Because there's another conversation I want us to have. I want to talk about your power, your capability, your identity, and the life that is still yours to create. Not when autism becomes easier or when your child reaches a particular milestone, or when the school or school district gets their act together, or when you finally have more help. Right now in the middle of the life that you actually have. I think one of the things that can happen when you become a parent of an autistic child is that your identity becomes very small very quickly. Because all of a sudden, there is a lot happening. There are specialists to see. There are therapies that you need to go to. There are assessments that you have to do, meetings and forms, so many forms and diagnoses and acronyms that you have no idea that you even want to learn. You become an advocate. You become a researcher, the driver, the appointment maker, the person who sees everything, who remembers everything and worries about everything. And because some of our children need a tremendous amount of support, it makes sense that a lot of our attention goes towards them. But over time, the life that you thought you would have just poof, vanishes into thin air because you became so busy being necessary in your child's life. And absolutely, that's what we do. But being necessary doesn't mean that you stop being a whole person. You are still allowed to want things. You are still allowed to have ambition. You are allowed to care about your health, your marriage, your friendships, your work, money, travel, your home, your appearance, your peace, and your future. You are allowed to want things that have absolutely nothing to do with autism. And I think some of us need to hear that more often. Because when life asks so much of you, desire for your life can start to feel like it's an indulgence. And I'm here to tell you right now, it isn't. Desire is part of being alive. When I talk about your power, I am not talking about controlling your child. I'm not talking about becoming so regulated that nothing ever bothers you. I'm not talking about waking up every morning thrilled about every circumstance in your life. That isn't power. That is just fantasy. Power is knowing that when something happens, you have somewhere inside yourself to stand. You can think, you can decide, you can ask for help, you can say no, you can change direction, you can recover, you can have a terrible afternoon and still be okay the next morning. That is power. And I think we sometimes forget how much evidence we already have of our own capability. Think about what you have learned because your child needed you to learn it. Think about the conversations that you've had to have that you never imagined in your life you would be able to have. Think about how many times something went completely sideways and somehow you figured out what to do next. Maybe you have cried a bucketful of tears. Maybe you said, I cannot do this one more day. And then somehow you picked yourself up and you did the next thing. Now, I'm not about glorifying the struggle. I don't think we need to turn every difficult experience into a beautiful life lesson. Some things are just simply difficult. But I do want you to notice yourself inside those experiences because you are there and you may be far more capable than the identity that you've been carrying around allows you to see. There is a difference between having a hard life circumstance, autism, and becoming a person who thinks that their entire life is hard. There's a difference between parenting a child with significant needs and handing the rest of your identity over to those needs. And this is where I want us to become really deliberate. Who are you in this life? Not just what you do all day. Who are you? What matters to you? What kind of woman or man do you want to be? What do you want your relationship to feel like? What would you love to experience in the next 5 years? What have you quietly assumed is no longer available to you? Now, those questions matter because your child has a life, but you have a life too. And those two lives are absolutely deeply connected, but they are not the same life. Now, I often talk about creating a life beyond autism. And I want to be very clear about what I mean by that. I don't mean leaving autism behind, because for many of us, autism will shape our family life forever. It may influence where you live, where you travel, how you travel, which schools we consider, what jobs we can take, how much support we need, and how we structure our days. That is real. But there is a huge difference between autism influencing the shape of your life and autism becoming the entire meaning of your life. You still get to build within the shape that you have. Maybe your life is not going to look like the life you expected when your child was born. Mine certainly doesn't. But different is not the same as empty. Different is not the same as less meaningful. And different doesn't mean there is no room for you and what you want. It might mean organizing better support or having the conversation with your partner that you keep avoiding, going back to work, leaving work, starting something on your own, taking your health seriously, planning the holiday differently instead of deciding that holidays are impossible, finding someone who can care for your child so that you can at least go out for dinner. It can also mean doing something that sounds incredibly ordinary, like reading a book in bed for an hour without feeling guilty. Often fulfillment is the gradual act of putting yourself back into your own life. And this is where identity becomes so important. Because if you see yourself as only overwhelmed and trapped and exhausted and behind or struggling, your world starts to organize itself around that identity. You stop asking interesting questions. You stop looking for possibilities. You stop making plans because you assume they will be disrupted anyway. You stop trusting yourself to handle what comes. And eventually, your life becomes very reactive. Autism leads, the school leads, all the things that you have to do leads, other people's needs lead, whatever's the loudest leads, and you just follow. But I want something different for you. I want you leading your life, not controlling it, leading it. And there is a difference. Control says everything needs to go according to plan. Leadership, on the other hand, says, I know things will change and I trust myself to respond. Control will tell you, I need certainty before I move. Leadership says, I can make a thoughtful decision with what I know today. Control may say, my child needs to be okay before I can be okay. Leadership says, I can care deeply about my child while also caring for the person who is raising them, i.e., that is you. That is a very different way to live. And I just want to say something here about capability. Capability doesn't mean doing everything yourself. There isn't a prize that you're going to get for being the most exhausted person in the family. There isn't a medal for never asking anyone to help. And there certainly is no rule that says good parenting should consume every available piece of you. Support allows you to remain a person. It gives you room to make decisions that are not being made from total exhaustion. And sometimes support is practical. Sometimes it is emotional. Sometimes it's a coach helping you separate what is actually happening from the huge amount of fear and guilt and responsibility that you have. That is a lot of the work that I do. I coach parents because I think there is just so much more available to you than you can even see when you're standing in the middle of the day-to-day intensity. I can see the capable person underneath the exhaustion. I can see the person who has ideas and dreams, but just hasn't given themselves permission to take themselves seriously. I can see the parent who has become so accustomed to accommodating everyone else that they have forgotten that they are allowed to have preferences. I can also see the person who thinks that they need a completely different life before they can feel alive again. They need to come back into a relationship with themselves. They need to decide what matters. You need to stop waiting for permission. You need to build support around the reality that you have. And then you can begin to move. So I want to leave you with a couple of questions today. What if your life isn't a problem to solve? What if your life is something to create? There will be issues. There are going to be difficult behaviors. There are going to be appointments that take up half of your day. There may be things about your child's future that you simply don't know. But around all of that, there is still creation available. There are dinners and friendships and careers and businesses and books and holidays and laughter and sex and walks and beautiful homes and money goals and new skills and ridiculous ideas and quiet mornings and meaningful conversations. There is still you. And perhaps the work now is not to become some completely new person. Perhaps it's just to stop dismissing the person who is already there. To take yourself seriously again, to trust your own capacity, to decide that your life deserves your attention as well. Because your child doesn't need a parent who's living half a life. They need you, the whole you, a supported you, a human you, a parent who is allowed to have a life. And if you're listening to this and thinking, I don't even know where I would begin, this is exactly the kind of work we could do together. So your next step is just to book a consult with me. And we're not going to spend the time on the call convincing you that your life is terrible enough so that you deserve coaching. You do not need to prove that. We are just going to look at where you are, where you want to be. And even if you don't know that, we'll get your thoughts out and what is getting in the way. We're going to look at your life, the one that you actually have, including your child's needs, your responsibilities, your relationships, your energy, and your limitations. And then we are going to start looking for your power inside of that life, your choices, your capacity, your future, your identity outside of constantly managing what is happening around you. Because I so do believe that you can be a devoted parent to your child and create a deeply fulfilling life at the same time. Those two things are not in competition. Your child gets to be who they are, and you get to become more of who you are. So if you're ready to explore what that looks like, just book a consult with me. The details are down in the show notes. Click a button, pick a time, and come on camera with me. Thank you so much for spending this time with me today, and I will speak to you next week. Bye.